Hello, folks. Welcome to my lecture on usability research for interactive media 2 at the University of Colorado, Denver. As a disclaimer, if you are watching this lecture on YouTube or outside the context of my class, this is a lecture I put together for my students in my class. The information that you may be getting in these videos are likely very specific to my coursework, but I do cover the generalities of these topics. So I do hope that you find what you're looking for when watching these lectures. So let's get to it. So for my Interactive 2 students, um, I have a sprint that I have put together for usability research. And I want to spend the next 2 lectures talking through what usability research entails. And then the next lecture will be how to use AI tooling to conduct that usability research. So before we can go into that, let's just get a quick background as to what user research and usability research is and what the differences are. So UX research is essentially a practice that helps us, designers, researchers, products, folks, engineers, be able to answer questions about all parts of the design lifecycle, from coming up with a product concept to writing the copy and designing the screens to prototyping and testing and then delivering it and launching it to the public. UX research can be conducted at every stage of that process, and it helps us answer very specific questions about either our methods or our design work to help improve our understanding of what people need and how they are perceiving the work that we have designed. UX research can be conducted really by anyone. Designers and researchers have a great sense of the types of questions, the type of UX questions they want answered. So they are in a unique spot to be able to write the studies to get those questions answered in a very, systemic, unbiased way. Um, However, I do want you to know that there's no single right method to solve all design research problems. There's not a one size fits all. It's very specific to where you are in the design lifecycle, what your questions are, and how you formulate that study to help you answer those questions. So you can do a lot with user research. You can use it to learn more about your target user base and their goals and motivations and needs. This can help you land on decisions like if the problem you're trying to solve is worth solving. So I've done generative research for my work at Amazon. For example, with monthly payments, I have ran a study where I invite folks to our research lab in Denver, and I have an open-ended interview with them to better understand how they use payment products and what they understand about credit cards and shop with points and financing. And that was a way for me to gather information and to hear from people directly about what their goals were, what motivated them to use payments, and what their needs were specifically when considering an item to put on a payment plan. Something else you can do with your user research is to uncover, guidance and direction on things that you've already designed. So either you've designed or someone else has designed. So let's say, for example, I am joining a new company that is a ride sharing company. Um, for me, if I were onboarding into that new role, for me to be able to wrap my head around this new business, chances are what I would do is start running studies or start observing people using similar products. So, again, a hypothetical, let's say I'm joining a new ride sharing company. And for me, in order to learn about ride sharing, I'm just going to go ahead and observe other folks use apps like Uber or Lyft or Lime, and being able to see how people sign up for these services, get their payment methods connected, and call that first ride or connect to their vehicle for that first checkout. That is a way that you can use existing solutions to provide guidance and direction on a way that you might want to solve a problem. Lastly, you can also use design research to evaluate the work that you've already done. So this helps you, again, kind of improve upon a design that you've created. It can also help you measure success. So you can look at if there were users who kind of dropped off during the funnel, or if they got tripped up on like language or colors, or if there were accessibility issues. UX research will help you uncover that. So the examples I've given you cover the arc of your, design lifecycle. So the first one was an example of how you can run research before you start designing. Um, the second example is research that you can run before and during your design process. And then the last example was a way for you to run research after you've done your design work. So you can see that UX research really does play a role and is a continuum across the product design lifecycle. So, what is the difference between design research and usability research? Well, design research is huge discipline. So it's got a lot of different methodologies that you can employ, as I've mentioned. Usability research is just one of those types. And it focuses, I hate to use the word in the definition, but it focuses on usability. So how well someone can use your product. So that's, can they figure out how to sign up for a service? Do they understand how to use your product? Do they understand what they have to do next? Do they understand the language? Can they fill out the forms, etc.? So usability research really helps you focus on learning how well someone can use your app or your product design. Okay, so when running usability research, again, you're looking to learn about whether the the app or the website that you design meets a set of success criteria. And the way that you do that is by sourcing participants that meet your target demographic, and you have them complete a set of structured tasks. You typically will want to write these tasks in such a way that is very neutral, but also allows you enough opportunity for your testers to think out loud and to show you how they would go about completing those tasks without your intervention. Some example research questions. So this is like the macro, like study question that someone may have as a designer on these projects. Um, for me, at least, like in my retail design role, one of my big usability questions was, at what point in my design experience do customers abandon the shopping process? So that was a really unique way of being able to study where the design fails to provide enough information or to give enough cues or direction for them to continue on to another path. Another type of usability research question can be like, are users able to complete the game mission given the tutorial information? So did you give enough context? Did you teach them enough of the functionality for them to be able to actually complete the game? So that would be a usability study topic. Um, can users complete fill in the blank task without confusion? So that also goes back to usability. Can they do something without intervention? And can they be self sufficient in completing that task without assistance? Um, Lastly, like another usability question could be like, what are some of the points of confusion in the search experience? So, if someone is on Google and they're looking up information about chemistry, for example, at what point in their search experience do they not get relevant results? Or do the results confuse them? Or do they end up navigating to different experiences without intending to do so? So as you can see, usability research um, is a large question that your study has, is a large objective, and then what you'll do is you kind of break down the study into smaller tasks that give you observational insights to answer that major question. All right, so there are some user research best practices that I want you to keep in mind. This is more applicable for usability research studies that you will conduct without AI. So this is the case where you actually have people that you're going to be dealing with. So I always suggest that you keep those sessions one-on-one. That enables you to dive deeper into topics and also help you follow those like, curiosities. And whenever someone behaves a certain way with your design, you're able to dive deeper into those behaviors and ask follow-up questions. Um, for your usability study, also writing in such a way where the language is very neutral and unbiased will help ensure that participants are at ease, and that they feel like they can provide their like design or provide their like usability opinions freely without being judged. The way that I've tried to do it is to make sure that my questions don't include any like qualifiers or any quality language. So I won't say things like, look at this really complicated design. Tell me how you would add an item to the cart. So I would never say like, I would never seed an idea for the participant that the design is complex. I would let them come to that conclusion on their own. So instead, I would say something like, imagine you are shopping for a laptop. Tell me what you see on the screen and what you would do to add this item to your shopping cart once you've decided this was the product for you. So those are two very different ways to kind of observe the same behavior. When it comes to sourcing your participants, you also want to make sure that the people that you talk to or the people that you recruit reflect your target user base. So in class, we talk to our other classmates or we rely on friends and family because those are the people that are readily available for us. The feedback that you get can be helpful, but it likely would not be representative of the target users of your product unless it was friends and family or like other design students. So it's very important that when you conduct your studies, in order for it to be helpful in the domain that you will be applying those findings, that you make sure to recruit participants that meet that target demographic that you've established. And then when it comes to running these sessions in person, you want to make sure that the environment is as natural as possible. In the case that you are prototyping and like trying to test a mobile design, make sure that folks are actually testing the mobile design version on a mobile device rather than opening your mobile designs on a desktop. Those, that can be a common trap for designers when presenting their findings. If you don't set up the study in a way that is analogous to how someone would use it in the real world, then your insights could be not applicable to the work that you're doing. Additionally, when running usability research, you also want to provide tasks that are realistic, meaning these are things that they can do without stumbling over unnecessarily. So you may see that on your own, but you don't want to essentially lay like trap questions or gotcha questions. You also don't want to interfere with the tester as they're trying to complete these tasks. So if you see that they're struggling, you don't want to say like, "Hey, like what you're supposed to do is actually tap on that button and you can move forward." Like that. That is not helpful for you. It's not really helpful for them either because you're essentially telling them how to move through the app when you're trying to actually learn how they're going to use the app on their own without someone being able to walk them through it themselves. Something else that I advocate for is recording your usability sessions so that you can review them later as you're taking notes. I have a tendency to like rewatch my videos and sessions like 3, 4, 5 times because every pass that I do, I'm actually logging like a different observation based on what I'm trying to study. So, let's say I'm studying how someone adds a laptop to their cart. Um, you know, I have a research video of like 10 minutes. For the first pass, I'll watch and see where did they click on the page and where did they stop and read. My next pass, I may have like the customer sentiment. Did they like, was this part easy? Was this part hard? What frustrated them? What was helpful? The next one may be their body language. So, they would say something like, oh, like this is really good, but then their faces are frowning and their inflection tells you that it is not very good. And sometimes these user research tools have like AI processes for data analysis, and then they will just say, oh, like your tester thought it was a good thing. It's like, no, no, no. Like that's why watching these videos and like actually doing some of this work yourself helps you arrive at more accurate findings. So that's why I heavily advocate for recording those sessions so that you can go back and watch them, and also so that you can transcribe notes or transcribe quotes that you want to pull into your analysis and your reporting. So something else with usability research is that it is best communicated through metrics, time on tasks, subjective ratings, and also like those user testing quotes of when someone is talking through your design or talking through how to complete a task and they can't do it or they can do it. Being able to pull those quotes and pull their voices into the conversations that you have about your design work is a very powerful skill and tool to have while presenting your designs. When it comes to sample sizes, I would say that this is a hot topic many times over, at least in the companies that I've been in. So, with statistical significance, it requires a lot of participants to arrive at a conclusion that can be generally applied to the larger population. Things like pharmaceuticals, you can imagine like the number of clinical trials that need to be run, and how detailed that work gets with like sourcing the right participants and all the medical profiles, doses, and like placebos and all that. So to prove that something works, like a medication, you're going to need a really large sample size. However, usability studies do not prove that something works well. They just kind of tell you if people can use them, use like the tool that you've designed or like the app or website you've designed, tells you if someone can use it, but it also tells you mostly what doesn't work. And because of that, you can usually have a much smaller sample size. So typically, the rule of thumb is around 5 to 7 testers will help you uncover about 85% of the issues that you will have with your design work. And just because you add more participants doesn't necessarily mean that you'll get better insights or like stronger insights. I find that there's diminishing marginal returns after the seventh participant, especially for usability. When it comes to other types of research, like generative research, that is a scenario where having more participants helps round out design opinions and like the different approaches that people may have to solving a particular problem. However, when you're focused on a design prototype of rather limited functionality, and that is the case of the projects that we have in class, you are able to curate a smaller group of folks to be able to get the data that you need to improve the usability of your product. So typically 5 to 7 is kind of a good match. Um, a way that you can, you know, save money or time is by maybe splitting that participant group from like a before design group and an after design group. So you can have your first draft of your design tested with like 3 to 4 people. And then once you make your design updates from the feedback of those people, you can then test with that second group of people to see how your new design performed against your previous design. So that could be a way for you to reduce costs and to potentially make better use of a small group. So with small sample usability studies, it is also not helpful to report anything about appeals or preferences. So saying that 4 out of 5 people preferred a treatment, you can say that, but it's not statistically significant and it's not as helpful as saying what was preferred. So maybe they did like the design and it worked well, but only this specific part of the flow worked well. Maybe it was just the sign up field or just the calendar invite download, but it wasn't the whole thing. So make sure that you're, again, kind of like being very accurate in the way that you're reporting your findings. And accuracy is tied to specificity. And you can't say that the design works for all users on the planet if only 5 people tested your product and were able to like make it through the user flow that you created. So again, just be very factual and accurate in your reporting. You also can't really report on whether people will use your product or if they like or dislike a feature. Um, I think that with a smaller sample size, the impact of the words that your testers use will be much more important than just simply saying that they like it or they dislike it. You can use these smaller samples to probe and to ask follow-up questions. So, what did they dislike about a feature? What was difficult about it? Not so much that they like or dislike, for example, the ability to buy a laptop, but maybe they found the product education confusing, or they disliked how the add to wish list button was further down on the page. Um, so again, it's be very, very specific in your reporting with these smaller sample studies because the insights are more helpful. Like the specific insights are more helpful than the generalities. And the generalities can't really be applied because, again, the sample size is so small. So here are some examples of usability research. So there's this wonderful glass here for wine. Um, a good usability research study can answer, can people drink wine from this glass without spilling it on ourselves? So that would be an example of something that you can study and test and write tasks around to learn whether or not they can or can't. A bad usability research question would be, do people like the design of this glass? Um, I mean, that is a question. It doesn't really tell you how usable it is. Again, it's more of a preference or an appeals question. Did they like it or did they not like it? Versus, can they complete a task, successfully? So in this case, can they drink wine without spilling it on themselves? Um, Here's an example of prescription medication bottles and the redesign of those bottles and labels. So a good research question would be, can people identify which medicine they need to take? A bad one would be, what do people think of the redesign of this pill bottle? So again, the good question is very specific. There's a task associated with it. You can measure, how far someone gets until they can't complete that task. The bad version of that question, what do people think? That's not helpful in really uncovering any feedback beyond the superficial of if they liked it or if they didn't. And they could provide information on the colors and stuff, or the text sizes. And while that's also relevant and helpful, it does not provide enough specificity for you to get the information you need to improve your design. Also bad would be, is the antibiotic effective? So again, like you're testing the design of the bottle, you can't stretch your study to now accommodate another type of question. That's like medication efficacy, right? And that requires its whole like different set of research methodologies and sourcing the right participants and statistical significance and so on and so forth. So good questions help you understand how usable your product is. A bad example of a question is something that has to do with appeals or preference. And then lastly, just causal questions like, does this cause this to happen? Like that's not a usability question. That's a very different type of research question. Here's another example. So with ride sharing apps for Lyft, can a customer set a pickup at the arrivals door at the airport? That is a very specific question. You can observe someone going through those steps and seeing if they can complete or if they drop off. A bad question would be, do customers notice the airport pickup zones in the app? That's a little bit more difficult to measure. Like, do they notice it? How do you know if they notice it? They might see it, but they might not say anything, right? If they were testing on a laptop device, you might be able to have a heat map that shows you where they're kind of hovering their mouse over, because usually your mouse pointer like hovers like where your that kind of mirrors like where your eye is looking, but we don't really have that on mobile, so it's very difficult for you to measure, and it's likely not helpful in the way that you would need to ask that question to get the answer you're looking for. So I'd like to conclude this usability research lecture with a real life example of where usability research is very important. Um, a number of years ago, it looks like in 2016, it's when those articles were pulled. A number of years ago, there was a car manufacturer that redesigned the gear shifter. Um, from time to time, you'll see different car manufacturers try to redesign a gear shifter. I've got opinions as a designer. I don't know how relevant they are now. I would say that the summary of my opinion is that you shouldn't redesign something, shouldn't reimagine something unless you absolutely need to. And in doing so, you will improve efficiency and the lives of many, many, many people. In the case of this gear shifter, the affordances have shifted so far from how people understand gear shifters to work. So in this case, you're pressing a button, or like you're like tapping something in order to shift from park, reverse, neutral, and drive. It's such a different model that the room for error is very high. And in this case, this specific gear shifter has logged 306 incidents of rollaway cars, 117 alleged crashes, 28 of those caused injuries. One of them caused the death of a Star Trek star. So I think this goes to show that usability research is really important, not just in the confines of the work that we do in class, but also in everyday lives, because the design work that you do will have impact on people. And the best way to make sure it has the right impact on them is to run an effective usability study, and to apply those findings to improve your work, to improve the quality of lives of others.